assets have one big problem. They are not very productive because the return generated on the asset is not going to accrue to the person who operates the asset, right? If you, for example, take this room. This is a room that is used, that belongs to the state. And in the off hours, it's closed down. And in the off hours, if this asset could have been used for productive purposes. For example, you rent this out for a party, right? You rent it out for banquet, you rent it out for whatever reason, charge a fee. Suppose logistically it can be done, but it's not done because the people who own this have no incentive of making this room productive in off hours. They're not going to get the extra income from that kind of use. And so if you apply this logic to an entire country, then you understand why state-owned assets in most countries, if not in all of the countries in the world, are less productive because of the lack of incentives to make these assets productive. So after 1992, the Chinese government began to try to make land, mines, state-owned enterprises more productive. But in order to make them more productive, they have to change what we call property rights. That is, there are two aspects of property rights. One is control rights, who control the property. The other is ownership rights, who actually own. What happened was that the Chinese government was constrained by two kinds of considerations. One is, as said, one is to make the property more productive. The other is they don't really want to privatize because this ideological resistance to the idea of private ownership was very strong, and still I think remains strong. So what they did was to do something in between. The government still owned a lot of property, but who controlled the property, actually, the so-called control rights have been decentralized. In other words, it used to be the case that only one person in China could decide what to do with a piece of property. But all of a sudden, over time, they decided that that situation is not very productive, so they decentralized. They decided that more and more people could control the property. So you envision a situation in which a piece of property that is nominally or legally owned by the state all of a sudden can be sold, can be transferred by a lot of people. This is the secret of China's crony capitalism. In other words, all of a sudden a lot of wealth with no clear owners could be stolen. The trick is a lot of people also controlled the wealth, right? They can decide. Used to be one person, now 30 people, 40 people had to, you have to gain their approval to sign this. So this situation necessitates what I would call collusion, that is a networked kind of corruption. You have to, a lot of people have to be corrupt at the same time in order for a piece of valuable property to be stolen. So this is the theory behind this. So now you ask, who actually benefits from the availability of state-owned assets that could be stolen? Most people say, well, it had to be people with political power. Wait a minute, that's not true. The biggest beneficiaries in this crony capitalist system are capitalists. So when you look at the big fortunes made in China, of course, senior officials have done very well. Some of them are, their families are billionaires. But real big fortunes in China are made by genuine private entrepreneurs who could gain access to these assets. The trouble they have is that how do, let me just walk back a little bit. why people with political power in China have not been able to grab the bulk of government-owned wealth. When you think about the Chinese political situation, the answer is actually pretty straightforward. The amount of wealth you can grab depends on the amount of power you have. So by the time you are powerful enough in the system to actually steal a lot of wealth, you must have invested a lot of your time and effort in climbing up the ladder of political power in China. So in economic terms, it's called a sunken cost. Suppose you've invested 15 years of your most productive years in trying to reach the top. Now you're a county party secretary, and there's this piece of land. You say, well, if I grab that piece of land, I can make $1 million, pretty good money, but then I have to quit the party. I have to be an entrepreneur. The party, first of all, doesn't like people who quit the party. This is not an organization you join and leave voluntarily. But for a party official, he really does not want to abandon all the political investment he has. So that's one. Second problem is that an entrepreneur actually needs risk capital. In order to be an entrepreneur, you actually need some money. And Chinese officials are very cash poor. They are paid a pittance in terms of cash salaries, even though they enjoy a lot of perks. So they don't have the risk capital to put down to buy a piece of undervalued asset. And finally, they don't have the skills. Private entrepreneurs have to have the skills. They look at a piece of property, then they know it's undervalued. They know how to turn it into productive asset. Party secretaries or government officials don't have that skill. So that's why Chinese officials most of them actually, do not take advantage of this historic opportunity to become wealthy private entrepreneurs. Do I have any evidence for this? Yes. In China, there is a very large electronic database which contains all the newspaper publications back to the 80s, all the way back to the 80s. So I typed in keywords. In China, for an government official to abandon his career to become a private entrepreneur, there's a special term for this. It's called 下海, jumping into the sea. You think it's a suicidal act, right? It's not. So I typed in party secretaries jumping into the sea, mayors jumping into the sea. The electronic database returned for 20-year period something like 12, 15 results. So in other words, once you get to a certain level inside the system, you are a prisoner of the system. You cannot really become a private entrepreneur. So that explains why in this crony capitalist story, the biggest winners are private entrepreneurs. Now, suppose you're a private entrepreneur and you see this piece of land you can get for next to nothing. Because in China, land is really valuable. This is a gigantic country, but only a very, I think, based on Chinese government statistics, something like 2/3 of the country are not arable, the land. So land is really valuable. So if you can get a piece of land, turn it into an apartment, commercial real estate, you're going to make out like a bandit. But the problem is that how do you get that piece of land? Essentially, that private entrepreneur has two options because he knows that the only way he can get a piece of land is to bribe somebody. And he has two ways of bribing somebody. One is what I call vertical collusion. That is, in China, the party secretary is the most powerful political uh, official because he has personnel power. He appoints all the other officials. So if you can bribe the party secretary, essentially you buy a packaged service, right? You bribe the party secretary, you say, Mr. So-and-so, party secretary so-and-so, I want a piece of land, and here's a pot of money, $1 million, $2 million. Then the party secretary, no problem, I'll take care of it. This is a packaged service because the party secretary then can go to various departments and say, you help him, you help him. Most of these people have to carry out the party secretary's orders. Many of them actually owe their jobs to the party secretary because the party secretary separately has taken bribes from these officials in exchange for their appointments. So the party secretary has his network. And so if you are an entrepreneur and you bribe the party secretary, in economic terms, you have saved enormous transaction costs. Because in doing a business transaction, other than the price of a certain good or service, there are other costs. How do you enforce it, right? Because enforcement is key. But the party secretary is your enforcer. So you avoid a lot of hassle. The trouble is, the party secretary is not going to be bought cheaply because you are buying a package that consists of transaction costs. So the party secretary would ask for premium pricing. Premium. So the party so when you look at Chinese party secretaries' amounts of bribes they get, typically they get a lot. And there's logic to this because you are buying a packaged service. And the second problem they have, so you pay more. The second problem a typical private entrepreneur would encounter in trying to bribe a party secretary is that party secretary senior officials are very picky. They only take on established blue chip clients. So if you're a big local developer, the party secretary would take your bribe because you are a known quantity. But if you're a startup, the party secretary wouldn't give you the time of the day because he doesn't know you. He's risk averse in this case. He may know you can be sent by government investigators. He may question your ability to pay. So the party secretary has a relatively small, select clientele. So what if you're a startup? Then you use the second strategy. What I call this outsider, insider clientele, collusion. That is, because in this case, you have to go through all the bureaucracies in order to obtain approval to buy that piece of land, right? So you have to go to the land bureau, the real estate bureau, the finance bureau, all of these. So the problem, of course, the advantage is that barrier to entry is very low. Anybody can go through this. The problem is that it has very high transaction costs because you have to go through them all. And if you miss one chop, the transaction is not going to take place. So you have to bribe a lot of people. Of course, you bribe them less. You are not paying for premium pricing, but very high transaction costs. And one of the transaction costs is you have to take a lot of people to dinners, right? Because dinner, it turns out to be is the perfect social occasion for them to get to know each other and start this kind of illicit transaction. And sometimes, for one reason or another, Chinese officials like to have foot massage. So you go to a lot of foot massage parlors as well. So it's a lot of hassle. But basically, these are the principal methods I've observed by reading so many cases. The book contains 260 cases of collusive corruption. These are cases involving a lot of people, and they cover the 5 different areas. So this gives you a sort of a flavor of the book. Now, what are some of the more interesting findings of the book? Because one of the most astonishing findings of the book is that a corruption market is a very sophisticated, developed market. I said at the beginning, corruption market is just a market. This, by sophistication and development, I mean it has its way of pricing, controlling risks, and finding the right way of getting transactions completed, and its way of enforcement. So let me just give you a few examples. Based on Chinese government data, roughly today about 40 to 45% of all corruption cases in China involve multiple individuals. In other words, this kind of crony capitalist practice accounts for roughly half of all corrupt activities, and that's a lot of networked corruption in the system. So the first question you ask is, how big is an average network? So by combing through the data, I found that there's a magic number. The magic number is 7. Median number of people involved in a particular networked corruption case is 7. There are several interesting things about this number, of course, as well. It's a lucky number in Las Vegas, 777, then you are in luck, right? Maybe that's the case. First of all, I consulted economic literature on collusion in the marketplace. The magic number is also 7. The number of firms that collude to fix pricing in the market is 7. Then you think about it. You say, well, why 7? If in a corruption network, you have to balance between several goals. One is detection risk. If the size of the group is too large, then detection risk is high, right? A lot of people, and they can do things carelessly and can be found. So you want to keep it small. But if the size of the network is too small, you cannot get things done, because you have to have people in critical places to work things out. But you also don't want to have too many people, because too many people will dilute the profit, right? Because you have to share the profit. So 7 appears to be the right number. So you get 7 people in the network, they can get things done, and they don't avoid, and you avoid dilution of profits, and you keep detection risk relatively low. So this is a pretty interesting finding. And the other interesting finding is that we know about collusion. There are 2 kinds of collusion. Illicit collaboration. One is direct, that is, the 7 of us get in the room, or I know that you know him. So we are all in this together. We talk, we discuss strategy. We share spoils. This is direct collusion. But in many cases, I do not find direct collusion, evidence of direct collusion, that you don't see description of several people who were arrested in a government agency or a state-owned enterprise who actually involved themselves together in the illicit act. So I come up with a different notion. There's something called implicit collusion. That is, suppose you observe some suspicious behavior of your colleague, and you know that colleague is up to no good. And that suspicious behavior, you say, well, if he is on the take, I should be on the take as well, because he's going to steal everything. There has to be something for me as well. Or if he is dirty, he's not going to rat on me. So right away you see the foundation of collusion, implicit collusion. But how do I actually prove this? Right? This is conjecture. You prove this again only because I cannot go to China and interrogate corrupt officials. If I had this privilege, I think I would have written the best book on corruption, right? But I don't have this privilege. So as scholar, all you need to do is to comb through documents. There are two very interesting pieces of evidence to support that there's collusion going on. The first piece of evidence is that when officials are arrested, and then prosecuted, they can get credit for ratting on other officials, like earning a major merit. So when I look at sentencing documents and description of their sentences, I look for one key phrase, 重大立功. That is, they all earned big merits. And sometimes the description will be more detailed. The official told investigators about wrongdoing by other officials. So in other words, you know that knowledge of wrongdoing in the system is widely shared. So that's implicit collusion. The other is even more interesting. That is, we know that many Chinese officials actually resent each other. Some of them hate each other. So the question is, if you know your enemy is dirty, why don't you denounce your political enemy to the anti-corruption agency, right? It turns out that officials who hate each other observe a rule that we know existed during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. It's called MAD. Anybody know what MAD stands for? MAD? Mutually assured destruction. That is because if the party secretary is dirty, the mayor is dirty, there's absolutely no benefit to either party if one of them goes to the authorities and say, my political enemy is dirty, because he can turn around and say he's dirty too. So it's mutually assured destruction. But the game is very different. But if one of them, for one reason or another, gets arrested first, he's going to turn against his political enemy in order to earn a major credit. So that's why when in this kind of situation, in a situation where there's a lot of implicit collusion, the arrest of one corrupt official always results in what the Chinese government calls collapse-style corruption. That is, they look around and soon they found a network of corrupt officials. Some of them are connected with each other, some of them are not connected with each other. So this is pretty convincing evidence in my book about the spread, the pervasiveness of collusion. Now, final example I want to present to illustrate how sophisticated and developed this corruption market is to give you, to illustrate to provide some tentative answers to a few questions. The first question is the corruption market in China developed or sophisticated enough to make a distinction between property and service? Because when you corrupt a government official, essentially you expect two kinds of returns. One is that official will give you a piece of property at steep discount, huge profit potential. The other is that that official will protect you, give you protection service. For example, fixing parking ticket, or if you pollute the environment, give you a much smaller fine or forgive the fine. That's service. Ideally, theoretically, if corruption or sophisticated corruption market will value property more highly than service, because the profit potential from a piece of property is much greater than service, because service can be, the upside of service is limited. The upside of an undervalued property is unlimited, right? So then statistically, you will find that officials who control property would gain more corruption income. That's true. So in my book, I found that there are one group of officials could only provide service. So these are police chiefs that who protect mafia, judges who would protect private businessmen, reduce fines and so forth, and then environmental protection agency officials providing service. So for these officials, their median corruption income is around $100,000. Now let's turn around and look at officials who could actually give out government property. Their median corruption income is $1.5 billion. So it's huge, right? So in other words, how do you explain the discrepancy? My explanation is that the market actually works very well in this case. If you provide service, you get this much. If you provide undervalued property, you get a lot more. So the second question is there a positive relationship between the amount of political power you have and the amount of corruption income you can generate? Because based on common sense, the more power you have, corruption income you're going to get. Well, this is common sense. As they say, in God we trust. Everybody else has to have data, right? So I have to produce some kind of evidence. So I looked at official income and put them in three groups: provincial level, city level, county level. There's real difference. A county level official corruption income is roughly 60% of that of his immediate superior, city level official. And the city level official's corruption income is about 70% of a provincial level. So in other words, the market does reward political power proportionally. Now, about how way the corruption market prices a certain good or service. Here's my example. In China, the practice of paying a bribe to a senior party official in return for a government appointment. Well, you say, well, it happens in the US all the time, except we call this political donations, right? But in China, it's not political donation, it's under the table. So, but how do you, in this market of buyers and sellers, how can a seller know the price at which this transaction can actually be cleared, can happen? So, for example, if I want to bribe you for the position of a librarian, should I give you 10,000, 20,000, 30,000? There's no price list. So how do I find? And this is you see how clever the market, how developed the market is. Essentially, there are two kinds of bidders, buyers in this market. One kind knows the party secretary well, and they use one strategy in order to avoid overpayment. So this strategy I call installment payment. Typically, it takes about 3 installments to complete the bribe process. So the first payment is what I call down payment. So if the party secretary, typically it happens on 3 occasions when the party secretary is hospitalized. So you go to the party secretary's hospital room. Typically he has a private room, And in China, when you see a patient in the hospital, you're supposed to carry some gift, especially fruit, good vitamins, I guess. So you bring a basket of fruit, give up to the party secretary's private hospital room and say, these are wonderful oranges from California, but there's something special underneath. So if the party secretary takes the first down payment, it's a good sign. You do not mention that you want that job because he's already hooked, right? So then the second payment, then after a while you go visit the party secretary, and this time you don't have to be that diplomatic. You give the party secretary another bribe and say, I hope you will support me in my work. And that job, I know it's going to be vacant, and I really like that job. So the party secretary gets the signal, gets the message. So the third time, the party secretary appoints you to the position, and then you go to the party secretary's room, house, or office, thank him, and give him a final, what I call, closing payment. So 3 payments, the deal is done. What if you don't know the party secretary, right? So here's now the other 2 occasions is a Chinese New Year. This is where they exchange a lot of gifts, and Mooncake Festival. Mooncake Festival is that everybody gives out mooncakes, and these are round, nice. These are sometimes round, sometimes square boxes, perfect containers for putting cash. Right? So that's so you pursue that strategy. But what if you don't know the party secretary well enough? Then you have to take the risk. I call this blind bidding. That you go to the party secretary's house, go to his office, and put down a bag of money, and say, I want that position. Very straightforward. And of course, the party secretary needs to take an educated guess at the amount of money in that bag. Sometimes it can be overpayment. Sometimes it can be underpayment. So this but in this kind of deal, typically the buyer overpays because it will be such an insult to the party secretary if you underpay him. Now, the final question in this case, in this particular pricing conundrum, is who actually finances the deal, right? Well, I have a few other puzzles to be solved, but one of them is who finances these kind of corrupt deals? Chinese officials actually don't have a lot of cash savings. Their monthly salary is very low. Now, when you read their cases, you find that they're financed by corruption income savings. If these are corrupt officials, then they have corruption income, and then they can use their savings from past corrupt activities to finance. Second is that they can embezzle a lot of public funds to find. Typically, they conduct their embezzlement through the reimbursement system. In China, if you want to get reimbursed, you use a lot of fake receipts. So they use a lot of fake receipts to get reimbursed for phony expenses. Then third is they go to private entrepreneurs who finance their bids, because private entrepreneurs are making political investments. If that person is going to be the next mayor, and if you have put in investment in his effort, he's going to repay you big time. So you know the financing mechanism. And then another puzzle is why are these positions sold so cheaply? When you look at the amount of bribe paid to obtain some kind of position in the government, it's ridiculous. It's very cheap. Then the more you think about it, it actually makes perfect sense, because the party secretary's power is enormous, but the amount of time in which he can use that power is very limited, typically 3 years. So it's like having fish on the shelf, right? So after a certain number of years, he's going to move on, and his power to appoint somebody is going to expire. So he sells those positions at steep discount. There's another important reason for discounting government positions. That is, one of the benefits of taking a bribe from somebody and giving that person a position in the government, especially in a very important department, is that that person, you own that person. He's going to be your willing collaborator in corruption schemes. Think about networked corruption. So that person, so if you have a private businessman to help, that person is going to help you. That's why when you look at government officials who sell these positions, you find that most of their corruption income comes from private business, not from selling government positions. And 70% of them engage in accepting bribes from private businessmen. So it's really their sideline activity. And one more puzzle is that, is there a relationship between positions being sold and the amount of bribe being paid for those positions? Because the point I want to illustrate is that this is a well-functioning market. It follows rules, because if I want to pay for the position, the amount of money I pay depends on whether I can use that position to generate income, bribes, right? So if that position can generate a lot of income, I'm going to pay a lot. If a position that's not going to generate a lot of income, I'm not going to pay a lot. When you look at some of the lists of bribes, because in some cases the Chinese government does provide us with detailed, itemized bribe lists and positions. You find that good positions like manager of a state-owned enterprise, which can generate, that position can generate a lot of income. Or you may be surprised, the director of a local education bureau. You say, what, how? It's like the school superintendent position equivalent can generate a lot of corrupt income, because that superintendent can decide on hiring contractors to build school buildings. That's why school buildings in China are not exactly very safe. He can decide on which publishers' textbooks to use. So a lot of corruption. And finance bureau chiefs. So you see these positions tend to have very high corruption, high bribes paid. So that's, and then another question is, these lucrative positions must have multiple bidders, right? So does the party secretary, does the seller actually sell it to the highest bidder? We don't have a lot of cases, but in at least 2 cases, they do. They actually sell it to the highest bidder, got the position. So the final puzzle is how is enforcement done in this market, in the corruption market? Because there are 2 kinds of corruption. One kind of corruption gets you nothing. The other kind actually gets something done. The kind of corruption that if you pay a government official for a certain service and the official stiffs you, just like our president, right? Then you're in deep trouble because nothing gets done. But what if the official actually gives an honorable ban? Does what you want him to do. So this is called enforcement challenge in the corruption market. So I look at the cases I have. The first interesting finding is that I've read a lot of corruption cases in China. I have not yet seen a case where a bribe was paid and a quid pro quo did not take place. In other words, all officials honor their commitments. So there's some kind of honor among thieves. Right? And in the case of this market for government position, the most surprising thing is, as I said, what happens when you have multiple bidders? The highest bid won. What about the second highest bidder? Does he get a refund? Yes, that person does get a refund. In one case, minus expenses. I call it service charge, right? So the party secretary did not refund a full 30,000 yuan, but somehow gave back 25. I want to end by saying that this the findings of the book paint a very worrisome picture about corruption and crony capitalism in China in the following ways. One is that crony capitalism in general and collusion among elites have a self-enforcing dynamic. The dynamic is bad money driving out good money. So that is because in a government agency or in an institution where a small group of people collude with each other, anybody who is clean is their enemy. So they will do whatever they can to make life miserable for them. And over time, the government agency will be colonized by mostly corrupt people. So that's that's one dynamic. The other dynamic is that over time, the wealth of the state will be stolen by a very small group of people, and that bodes very poorly for equality and for the future of democracy. Because even if China should democratize, you're going to be stuck with an oligarchy, because you will have a relatively small group of people controlling enormous wealth. And that means democracy will have a very tough chance of survival. I think I've talked long enough, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
You mentioned that at the end right there about bad money driving out the good money. Have you thought about maybe writing your next book about examples and cases of that?
Oh, I think maybe I can write an article, because writing a book takes too long, and I am writing another book, but not on this. Probably you can look at the end of my book. I talked about the emergence of the mafia state, local mafia states. In some provinces, cities, you will find all the most important officials and successive administrations were all corrupt. So that those examples would be perfect case studies. I think the challenge is to dig deeper and find out whether they were any good people to begin with, and how the good people were removed from these jurisdictions. In the book, there was one case. There was this private entrepreneur who wanted to buy a power station for nothing. So he went to the party secretary, and the party secretary took his bribe and said, "The mayor is greedy. You can take care of him with only 100,000 yuan, which is about 15,000 US dollars." But when the mayor was being tried, he said, "I had to take the bribe. If I don't take the bribe, the party secretary would be mad at me." So this is bad money driving up our good money. Yes.
Could you estimate how many percentages of property that are officially owned by Chinese government?
Well, right now is the Chinese government still owns, based on various estimates.
Like over 50%?
Current is that I saw two numbers. One is a liquid asset, the asset that can be monetized relatively quickly, that is about 4 trillion US dollars. And that's 40% of GDP. So if you, 4 trillion, how many people can decide? If you become an official, if you are, say, 1 million people, officials who can get a piece of that, that's huge, right? Another would say it's like 15 trillion, includes illiquid assets. So I would put even 4 trillion, that's a lot. And that's after 20 years of theft, right? Yes.
Famously, the President Xi Jinping has come saying that he's going to attack corruption in China. Has that changed the way that crony capitalism has functioned now? Have they had to change the strategy?
Thank you very much. China has seen a 4-year-old anti-corruption campaign, very ferocious. A lot of people have been arrested. And for scholars like me, it's a bonanza because you see a lot of cases, right? No, he has not destroyed the market. What he has done is to suspend trading in the market because there are still buyers and sellers. Buyers have stuff to sell, 4 trillion, right? Well, sellers have stuff to sell, and buyers, I'm an entrepreneur, there's still 4 trillion out there if I get a 20% discount, 50% discount. But they know that the sheriff is watching. Trading has been suspended, but the market has not been destroyed. So several things. A, you have to actually do something about this pot of gold, which nobody really owns. Second is that if you want to fight corruption, you have to use not a small anti-corruption agency. The Chinese anti-corruption agency is very small, and it doesn't do a good job in catching people. I have numbers. I call this duration of corruption because the Chinese official accounts of corruption are very helpful to scholars. They always say starting on a certain date. So the first act of corruption and the date of arrest. So you can actually calculate how long. For a county level official, it's 6.5 years. So that's long. For a city level official, it's something like 8.3 years. And then a provincial level official is more than 10 years. So they can stay corrupt for a very long time, which means they cannot be detected quickly. Even more astonishingly, 84% of them all received promotions during the period when they were corrupt. When you are considered for promotion, you are vetted. So it means the existing system of investigating corruption doesn't work. The only way you can fight corruption is to empower the media. A media watchdog helps. Then you actually need to have an independent judiciary that can prosecute corruption effectively. Because right now it's a very politicized system. If I take 1 million, but I'm a buddy of the party secretary can protect you. But if you are not the party secretary's buddy, then you are, as I say, cooked.
So, did you meet any difficulty from Chinese government when you learned about corruption?
Well, I did most of my research in Hong Kong, which is still safe for scholars. For Chinese tycoons, it's not safe. Yes.
Has the increase in corruption led to an increase in the underworld in China, such as the increase in Russia?
No, Russia is a different league. I'm not going to make any moral equivalent statements here. There's a chapter in the book on the collusion between law enforcement and the Chinese underworld. I want to make 2 points. One is that corruption has definitely led to a significant growth of organized crime, and organized crime in China is expanding into more lucrative fields. It's not garden variety organized crime, prostitution, drug trafficking. It's actual real estate development, mining. Fits perfectly well with my idea of property-based crony capitalism. But the second point I want to make is that the Chinese state remains actually quite effective in identifying threat to its monopoly of violence, and then it retains the capacity to crack down. So in those cases where local mafia and their sponsors or their patrons are identified, the central government always succeeds in arresting both the mafia bosses and their police chief patrons. Yes.
Well, as you know, I study Hainan.
I know, yeah.
It's
Defense, yes.
where or localism, or local pride, or local sentiment, and there's always a concern at the national level that it will be stronger than their love for country,
Yes.
or their central loyalties. And I was wondering if you find cases of local heroes, sort of bringing home the bacon to the county, and then a kind of county or a big protest rallying on behalf of somebody who's on trial in a way that says, he was. In America, we have pork
Yes,
stealing
yes.
and finance.
Yes.
It's above board.
Yes.
Here, it's not above board.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to do it. Do you
Yeah.
have any examples of uprisings on behalf of a
Protest.
popular local corrupt figure?
No, actually, this is surprising. The absence is conspicuous. There were examples on the other side. That is, because these officials have protected a lot of local entrepreneurs. The official goes to jail, is released, and his buddies would line up, welcoming him back to freedom. So that's but not ordinary people, because crony capitalism, by definition, takes care of a small circle. So the largesse does not get spread widely enough. And another example is local mafia bosses. If they get out, then the organized crime would organize a welcoming party. Good.
Thank you so much, Professor Pei.
Thank you.